Good morning, Watershed. We are so excited you're here. My name is Blair Gore, and I am the children's pastor over in Greenhouse. So typically I'm there on a Sunday morning, but today I get the honor to be with.
Hey, everybody. It's me, Cedric Lundy, one of the teaching pastors on the teaching team, and just really grateful to be able to join you all. I miss seeing your faces, being able to hug on your necks, and, I even wanted to, wear this just to cheer you guys up a little bit, because, like, who is immune to the cuteness that is Baby Yoda? Just saying.
I cannot wait to have this conversation this morning and to glean from your wisdom as you and I both talk to Andre Henry. He is going to be with us this morning. We are so excited. He'll join us in a few minutes and just talk a little more about what it means to be anti-racist and the things that we can do to move in that direction and to join him in the journey that he is on.
It's just interesting anytime these conversations that are had, that they can have a lot of weight to them and maybe even discomfort. So hopefully we're all made maybe uncomfortable in a good way, or even just able to use so many of the things and values that we as a Watershed community, the tools that we have at our disposal to be able to look deeper within with anything that might make us a little uncomfortable. So.
Left on the shore like trash and debris.
We are so excited. We have Andre Henry with us this morning. Andre is a speaker, musician, writer, artist, theologian, and I would even call him a historian. He has lots to share, and he is just full of experience and wisdom, and so relatable at the same time. So his mantra is, it doesn't have to be this way. And I am just excited to have you here. Good morning, Andre.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Andre, your hopefulness is one of my favorite things, and your grace. And there's just so many parts of you that come through in the midst of wanting to make the world a better place. But there's one statement that you make that you say, you used to be a white man. Can you unpack that a little bit to start us off this morning?
Yeah, of course. So I say that I used to be a white man because in America, in the United States, everyone is trained to think within a certain system, right? We're trained to believe certain things about ourselves and about our country. We taught a certain version of our history in order to support that. And that way that we're taught to think is white. Like we're all raised to be white people. We read white authors. When we think about what is the great literature that you read in high school, they're mostly white authors. Who are the philosophers that you learned about in school? They're mostly white men. If you take a theology course like I did, I have 2 degrees in theology. You, at least at that time, now people are learning now that they need to diversify some, but you would have learned about Thomas Aquinas and Martin Luther and Zwingli and Calvin, but you might not have read James Cone or Gustavo Gutierrez or feminist theologians, womanist theologians. You learn about Columbus coming here and discovering Turtle Island. Although there were already people living here, you learn we trace our hands and make turkeys out of them for Thanksgiving to celebrate this dinner that apparently happened between indigenous people and pilgrims. But we don't learn about the 700 indigenous people that were massacred in that area around that time. And so all of these things are training us to live comfortably, or at least to comply with the boundaries of a world that's made for white people. And so when I say that I was a white man, I, like everyone else, had ingested those ideas and those thought patterns and didn't realize just how much I had bought into whiteness until I was kind of waking up from it. Which, just while I'm saying that, I think it bears saying that, like, when we talk about race and racism in America, we have like a very inadequate idea of what we're talking about, like just the idea of race, the idea of racism, because we really think that it's about skin color in this country. And so people people talk as though like having melanin in your body is like a it's there is a as though melanin is the same as like white blood cells when it comes to racism, like because you're black or brown that you can't enact or support white supremacy. But the truth is that every domination system wants for the people that are dominated by it to comply peacefully. you know like it's way better for patriarchy when women actually espouse patriarchal ideas and say, well, my place is in the kitchen and I want for a man to be a real man and all that kind of stuff. It's way easier for heterosexism to dominate LGBTQ people if LGBTQ people will stay in the closet. It's way easier for white supremacy to dominate black people and brown people if black and brown people talk about black people like the problem with or the reason why black people suffer is because we won't pull our pants up, or because we don't talk like white people, or because we have dreadlocks when we go to work, or because we can't keep a family together. All these anti-black ideas.
I was. You have to forgive me. I was a little distracted because I was just admiring the stools behind you and just thinking about how I could discover those.
There's some nice stools behind you. Be ashamed if someone
discovered it. Some of the technical terms around that come to mind here, and you speak about that, is the idea of assimilation, yes. The idea of ascending to whiteness,
yes,
and the reality that for some of us we can't ascend to whiteness, we can't ascend to, or we shouldn't even be forced to ascend to masculinity, and just all those different things.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that woke you up?
So I would say that I was always aware of race and racism because I grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Stone Mountain gets its name from a huge piece of quartz that is jutting 1,686 feet out of the ground. I make a distinction between that because that is not how mountains are made. It's literally a rock. So it's technically not a mountain. It's just a huge rock. And on the side of it is carved the largest Confederate monument in the country,
mm-hmm.
of Jefferson Davis, the former president of the Confederacy, of Stonewall Jackson, and Robert E. Lee riding on these horses. And so I mentioned that to say, like, I grew up around all these vestiges of white supremacy, right? These lingering vestiges of white supremacy, including my next door neighbor, who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan and the pastor of the church at the top of the street. One day, my neighbor pulled a shotgun on my older brother for walking our dog through the neighborhood. And he used to harass us. We were the first black family to move into that neighborhood. So I knew of racism like that. But that's how a lot of white people think about racism, right? It has to be overt. It has to be explicit. It has to be intentional. Although I don't think he was intentionally being racist. But there's a scholar who says that racism is used to primarily control the behavior of whites. And so even though that man was being explicit and using his agency to be racist in a very direct way, I wouldn't say that he intended to be racist. He was just on autopilot. So anyway, so I grew up around that, but like many white people who were taught about racism by boomers, because I think that boomers, the message that they got from the civil rights movement was, okay, so racists make a big deal about race, so we need to not make a big deal about race. And they went to being colorblind. They just like swung the entirely other way.
Mm-hmm.
We're just not going to talk about race at all. So growing up in that kind of environment, I thought, well, racism is mostly gone. Like Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. had a tag team wrestling match where they like beat up racism.
Pow! Yield!
Can there be a cartoon with this in it?
Yes, as long as it has like the Mortal Kombat letters, finish him.
Finish it.
Come here.
Well, that did happen, right? Like John F. Kennedy was like, finish him, and then Dr. King kicked racism's head off with the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. And that's what I thought. Now the other thing was that if I did experience more of those like kind of subtle forms of racism and tried to like name that as a child or as a teenager growing up in Stone Mountain, all the white people around, I shouldn't say all, but yeah, no, it was all of them. All the white people that I was around were like, shh, like, don't. Now, Andre, racism is a very serious accusation.
Right. Like, racism is like Candyman. If you say his name 5 times, he gonna come get you.
Or it's like murder, right? They're like, people think that like a racism, like racism and it's like murder. Like it has to be premeditated, it has to be intentional, it has to be done with the intent to kill, right? So whenever I try to like identify something like that as a young man, the white people that I grew up around, because I grew up in a white evangelical context, so the white people I grew up around would shut it down really quickly. But then I moved to New York, and New York is interesting because I really learned what systemic racism looks like from living in New York City, which Northerners don't want to admit that you can learn that lesson by living up north, but you can. And it was when, the landlord that I spoke to in Harlem from Craigslist heard my voice on the phone and couldn't tell that I was black. And it was like telling me he doesn't meet many decent people in Harlem and that he'd like to be my friend and all this kind of stuff. But then when he sees me, watching his face drop and him refusing to rent the apartment to me, it's trying to catch a cab on the Upper West Side and the taxi driver yelling out the window, "I'm not going to Brooklyn." I live in Harlem. It's having the police stop you and search you for drugs and weapons. 3 times within 1 year, I was almost arrested because, the cops were sure that I must be carrying contraband. I lived in New York City during stop and frisk. So, I experienced stop and frisk personally. I was seeing and the only difference between Stone Mountain and New York City was that when I said that was racist in New York City, most of the white people around me were like, yeah, that's racist, that you experienced racism. That was the only difference, was that in one place growing up, there was kind of this censorship, this policing of how I was able to name my experience that didn't exist in New York. So in New York, I heard the phrase systemic racism for the first time. And I didn't really understand it because I never heard of anyone talking about giving you language to describe that experience. I knew the experience because I've been experiencing it, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And I at least left New York with that language. That it was also the first time in New York where we talked about race. There was an event at my church at the time. I was a worship leader and a teaching pastor at the time. I'm in New York. We have this event at my church, and it was about whiteness. And I'd never heard the term whiteness before. And it was the first time that I'd ever been in a conversation where people were talking about race by talking about white people. Usually when we talk about race and racism, we talk about it as a black people problem. And the question that people are concerned with is, well, why does all this bad stuff keep happening to white people, right? I mean, to black people. Why does all this bad stuff keep happening to black people? Or is there anything bad happening to black people? Sometimes that's where the conversation is starting for people, right? But this was a conversation talking about why white people being the way that white people generally are in America is consequential for other people. and I'd never experienced that.
Hmm.
So I would say it was like the kind of this gradual process of being in New York and my own experiences, having experiences like that where people were kind of putting language to it. Still wasn't like, I wasn't necessarily fighting racism at the time, but Eric Garner was killed by the police while I lived in New York. Mike Brown was killed by the police while I was on my way to California to Fuller Seminary.
Hmm.
I watched Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling. It was just, 2014 to 2016 was, as far as the news goes, that was like every time you turned around, like there was another viral story of a black civilian being killed in a police exchange. And I think that was when the systemic part, like just, it was like blaring red lights, like I already knew that this was a thing. I had language for it, but now it was like when Philando Castile was killed, the day after Alton Sterling was killed,
Yep.
like those two back to back,
Yep.
was when it was a watershed moment for me. And I was like, I am so tired of just sitting here and feeling helpless and powerless. And I committed that day to learning everything that I can about the system of racism. Like, how does it work? What are the details? What are the statistics surrounding it?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that was like that journey that I started then of looking for how does racism work and how can we do something about it was like apocalyptic for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I already knew that it was bad. I knew it was a problem, but the more that I investigated was the bigger that problem got, the more pervasive, the more violent, the more vicious. And it still hasn't stopped, to this day. I'm watching what's happening with COVID, understanding that the tracks that were laid for this virus to travel were laid by white supremacy centuries ago. And it's as though there were rails for a train, and that this pandemic is traveling those same channels.
Yep.
And is disproportionately harming Black people.
People of the world, let's get it started. Everyone has got a role to play. Don't have those who help us or disheartened. Where there is a will, we can make a way.
So much of what you said there resonates with me personally. And interestingly enough, I think it resonates with a lot of folks in our watershed community because I was on staff at full time at Watershed for a lot of those events that you mentioned. And I can remember it awakening a lot of the folks in our community deemed white and really started to help initiate us into taking some of those questions more seriously and looking into, like you said, the history instead of just explaining it away. So one of the things that you didn't mention, but is like a great segue, is that's when you got a fire lit under you and wrote what is now the infamous viral, like, bro, I could have wrote that. I could have written it. And so I just want to personally thank you for your blog post that you wrote called To All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep.
I appreciate that.
But like, could you maybe share what that was like, not only writing that piece, but as someone who obviously, from the story you've just told, grew up in predominantly white spaces, have friendships with folks deemed white that you love and cherish, and just maybe what was going on in your inner life.
Yeah, well, I would say that that blog post was years in the making. I think it was last February in 2019, and so there came a point in 2016. It was like a certain day, and I remember it when I was just like, "This is it." Like I can't I can't keep arguing with people who are opposed to racial justice work, and many of those people happen to be people that I mean that I'd grown up with. Some of them that I considered family.
Mm.
Some of my best friends. You know, the thing standing in the way of my my former white friends and family, it wasn't just benign ignorance. It was that they did not find me believable. So two of those people actually had come back to me later that year and said, I'm finally starting to see.
Mm.
And the reason why they said that they're finally starting to see was because one of them went to like some kind of human trafficking event and heard about how human trafficking disproportionately affects non-white victims, right? And the other was because they saw this movie, The Free State of Jones, starring Matthew McConaughey.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I was part of the family and you couldn't believe me. But as soon as a white stranger told you the same thing that I've been telling you for years, you're like, oh, I've had an epiphany.
Oh, man.
And so I was just like, there was so much that led up to that day. But I remember that day just being like, and they didn't even get very far. It wasn't like, well, now we believe you. They were just like, okay, so racism might be a thing. And I was like, yo, like this journey, if this journey is going to be long for you and I can't even help you. That idea that white people are inherently superior is so deeply entrenched into your imagination that the only thing that's going to happen if I keep talking to you is I'm just going to keep fighting with you and you're going to keep expressing racism to me. I can't be sitting here. I can't be sitting around here with you arguing about whether or not racism is a serious problem. That has to be a given in the foundation of the work that I do. So I walked away. So over the years, like that was 2016, this is 2019 when I wrote this blog post. Some of these folks would just resurface and they would be like really just vicious about it, like, because I also had a watershed moment in 2016 where I said, you know what, white people's feelings are not the parameters by how I'm going to do this and talk about this work. Because white people assume that this conversation is about them. And a part of the conversation is like, it has to be concerned with them. But that doesn't have to be everybody who's doing the goal of everyone who's doing this work does not have to be about converting white people to anti-racism. I learned by studying social change, social transformation, social movements, that at the end of the day, there are some people who agree with you or they see what you're saying and they want to be involved, but they just don't know what to do. And I decided those are the people I'm going to talk to. The thing that has separated us is not hatred, but an apocalypse. This is actually what I'm writing about, but we know like the word we get that from, it's the Greek word apocalypsos, to reveal, to unveil, to uncover, right? The Black Lives Matter movement showed me something about you. It showed me something about America. It unveiled some things that y'all been trying to cover up for a long time. My eyes were opened. I tried to tell you. You wouldn't listen. And so I decided to go on that journey and you decided not to come with me. You don't then get to turn around and call me a bigot because you chose not to come. You get what I'm saying? So I sat down. I was like, listen, like these people keep saying this, that I hate white people. And so I'm going to make a receipt right now. You say that I hate you, but the truth is, no, I love you. And I've had those kinds of things where like I'll come back to people, or I stopped doing that now because I realized that they haven't moved. But I have like come back to people and just try to like reestablish relationship or bring repair in some way, and just found that it doesn't work. And I've literally laid on my floor and wept over some of these people. It's not hate,
It's grief. Sorry.
It's whiteness that's in the way. You know, it's whiteness that is in the way. That these people really believe that they are white and they don't even know it. And I think that the thing is that because they refuse to know it, like, it can never be healed.
But it doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be this way.
So what would you, I mean, again, so much of that resonates. What would you say, or if you were to write a letter or a blog post to the friends who are white that you could keep, like, what are some of the shifts and movements that you saw in those individuals and those relationships that the relationship has been able to be maintained and kept and grow?
I mean, the white friends that I have, they're just not in denial about what's happening in this country. You know, they're taking responsibility for their part in history. You know, they're taking responsibility for creating a new world, and they're doing the work by themselves to understand what does it mean to be identified white in this country. And how can that change? They're supporting Black activists, you know, and they're educating other white people.
That again, so much of what you're saying is resonating, just because so much of the way that I existed in white evangelical spaces was to play by their rules.
Yeah.
Not looking at scripture and Jesus through a fresh eyes of seeing that he was very confrontationally non-confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
He was not going to really waste his time, as you articulated, with people who quite clearly were not there to actually learn, to move, to grow. And he was very sharp with them at times. He never went looking for it. He never instigated it, but he was not opposed to calling a spade a spade. And yet, you know, using the language of those churches I grew up with, he was perfect. He was sinless.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I have personally found that a really, a paradox to lean into.
I don't know how we ended up with like this picture of Jesus that Jesus always spoke softly and was inoffensive. And they're like, you know, Jesus was just a great teacher of love and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, he was, but he definitely didn't make people comfortable, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's because Jesus was white. Come on, Andre.
I did tell someone said something. I don't remember what they said about the Bible yesterday, but I was like, I could be very sarcastic. I was just like, both of you are liars. The Bible was written in Hartford, Connecticut in 1619 on the back of a bunch of slave receipts. And then it was buried on a Virginia farm where it was later discovered by none other than George effing Washington.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, how long must we sing these songs? Oh, how long must we sing these songs? No, we won't stop because we're upset. And it won't stop because of our fear. No, it won't stop because we need rest. No, it won't stop because of our tears.
I mean, I grew up in the South and then lived in LA for a while and then moved back to the South. And so I taught school, and And like you said, history, everything that's embedded, everything that we teach is very much in that white world.
Mhm.
So, what do you think? What would you suggest? What action can we take to not just individually, but to communally to unlearn and relearn some of this historical narrative that's there? Like, how do we get away from just the Rosa Parks and the MLK? How do we move towards teaching kids and teaching ourselves, because most of us didn't grow up with that, an accurate view of history?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, because to make this point, that I think some people, when they hear me talk about history, and I've committed some stories to memory and stuff like that, I think that some people assume, well, Andre knows that because he's black or because he doesn't work. Right? Like black people know black history, but they don't realize we're all raised in the same environment, in the same kind of country. So when you hear black people speaking confidently about the fuller story of American history, it's not because it's not because all of us know this. It's because we usually have had to put in work ourselves to learn a fuller version of our history. So we are doing that work, or it's because we had black parents that made sure that we knew, like at home. So our parents did that work. Because I have a lot of friends who were like, yeah, my dad made me read about Huey Newton, or my mom made me read about Sojourner Truth or something like that, right? So, I mean, some of us need to start reading groups, You need to get your friends together and start a Facebook group and get a reading list. Google has plenty of reading lists about race and racism. And y'all need to decide, we're going to read this book, and every other month, we're going to talk about it. We're going to discuss it. That's one way that we have power already outside of depending on institutions. But the other thing too is that some people need to be organizing to get on the school board and to influence this curriculum. Some people need to become teachers, and commit that in their educational career, like that they are going to expose people to women authors, to Black authors, to Latino authors, to Asian authors, Asian American authors, that they're going to do that. There's so many ways that people can get involved, but I think that we have to take responsibility. We have to take responsibility for what's happening around us, because we have agency. Like, we are the writers of history. It's not a story that's just happening to us.
Yep.
And so we have to be awake, and we have to organize. Like Dr. King said, and I think this applies more broadly, but he said, those who love peace must learn to organize better than those who organize for war.
That's deep. That's deep.
People of the world, let's get it started. Everyone has got a role to play. There's no need to feel helpless or disheartened. Where there is a will, we can make a way. People of the world, we have the power to bring about the world that ought to be. We really are the heroes that we long for. We only need to fight and we'll be free, maybe.
So some of what you've just been describing and detailing, I imagine is some of the things that, and I've heard you talk about this elsewhere, of dreaming, of seeing and participating in a new human rights movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there has to be, like I said before, the only way that this changes is if people organize. If people organize and pursue that change and use the power that we have. And it's not an individual power. And that's the thing, is like, we have to get past this cultural narrative where it's like, yeah, like the power of one. Sure, sometimes, but more often than not, when we're talking about social change, it's the power of many together. We have these narratives, these ideologies that history is made by great individuals. It's made by great men. You forget like that Dr. King couldn't have
Right.
like ended Jim Crow by himself. You know, he didn't. You know, there were thousands of people meeting almost daily, you know, for a while in the South that were organizing. We're looking at literally, possibly the extinction of the human species. Like that's what we're looking down the road at. Nobody wants to talk about it, but like if we don't dismantle like the fossil fuel industry and stop burning coal and these different resources the way that we're doing it, we're not going to be here in 2060, 2070, 2080, you know? And we need to get those things down to net zero by 2025. So we don't have time to go around acting as though this is a matter of agreement or not. Like, we need people who understand this issue that is already disproportionately hurting non-white people all over the world. We need people who get this to actually organize and start withdrawing their money from people who fund this industry.
But
right?
Wait a minute, Andre, isn't this partisan issues we're talking about?
If you think only Democrats are going to die in climate disaster, then I guess so. You know what I mean? But like,
yeah,
you know, anybody who wants to live and wants to have kids that will live long, happy lives should care about this, right?
Yeah.
So and this is the same with, I don't think that white supremacy and racism is separate from that issue, right? Like whatever the issue is that we're talking about though, like whether it's racism or sorry, patriarchy or, you know, male supremacy rather, you know, like these are things that people have to organize to do, you know, and have to be strategic about, well, how does that system work? Even if part of that system that they're talking about has to do with the intangible, you know, the way that people think, people's imaginations, all that, which is why you brought that up. I was like, I'm talking a lot, but there was another part of this question. The vision of tomorrow, you know, we have to begin imagining what kind of world do we want to live in? And we have to get detailed about it, you know, like, we have to stop just like tweeting our values into the internet and thinking that like that's going to change. No, that's magic. That's not. You say that you care about racism and you're against it, you know, or that you want for it to change, or that you want to dismantle white supremacy. Okay, what will the world look like if you were successful? How would human rights be different? How would law enforcement be different? How would the media be different? How would organized religion be different? How would these things change? What does that world look like? Because until we have an idea of where we want to go, we have no idea how to get there.
Hey, amen.
You know? And it's like, this is just a principle of life in general. Like, if you want to do something, I almost said, if you want to be somebody, if you want to go somewhere, you know, but if you want to accomplish anything, you have to make a plan. And when it comes to things like, you know, having a United States that is actually democratic, and when I say the reason why I went there to democratic is because the thing that has always undermined the notion of democracy in America is racism, is white supremacy, right? So if we want to have an America that is actually democratic, then some people got to get together and start envisioning what that looks like and start making some plans, start organizing.
Yeah.
That's good. I think it also speaks to some of your creativity whenever you talk about creating this world. And it reminds me of an interview that you did with Fuller with the Brim Center a while back, where you talked about that creativity and like God creating, you know, this garden. And it was a creation that God was going to have to live in at the same time. You know, it wasn't just like, this is a pretty picture, but it was like, this is actually where I'm going to be. So can you speak to some of like how this has affected your creative process?
Yeah, I realized that trying to do the work of justice, to me, it's creative work, it's imaginative work, you know. And I've learned in just reading so much about social change how many folks have been artists that have moved into, leading revolutions. Václav Havel comes to mind, who was a playwright, and his plays were so subversive that he was imprisoned for them. And when he was released, he became the president. So much injustice, so much of the status quo is sustained by a lack of imagination, by a poverty of imagination. People literally can't imagine the world being another way. So when you talk about prisons, right, the reality of prisons is that they do not keep us safer. They exacerbate the problems that we claim that they're meant to solve. They are financially not viable, and they make people worse. That's the reality. But if you say we should do something else, what's the first thing someone's going to say? They're going to say, well, what else are we going to do? Because without the imagination, without creativity, we are going to be stuck with what we have. So like for me, like what it looks like, even as I'm strategizing, and for me, I don't think that everyone has to do the kind of work that I do. I stumbled into the kind of work that I do. But what it looks like for me is like I'm drawing pictures. I ordered some new Crayola markers the other day, like this, it has to be fun. It has to be joy. It has to be color. It has to be creativity. It's art, I think that we all have that artistic thing in us though. I constantly say like everyone has like a previous life or a former career as like a cowboy or a ninja or a princess or something like that. When you were young, that's what you did. You used your imagination in that way. We have to recover that together. So I really think that, we need to come together in our different locales. We need to dream together. We need to talk about what kind of world that we want, and we need to make it fun. One of my favorite freedom fighters, or one of the most influential freedom fighters on me, is Srđan Popović. He led a revolution in Serbia to oust the dictator Slobodan Milosevic. Before leading that revolution, Srđan had no desire to be an activist. He felt like activism was boring. It's what old ladies do. Like they go to City Hall and they beg the mayor to put a stop sign on a corner or something like that, or something like that. He just felt it was boring. But one day he saw this band on the back of a flatbed truck, like careening through the public square in Belgrade, and they were singing these songs. And the song that he heard was like, if we're busy fighting the war, the lyrics basically translate to, if we're busy fighting the war, when will we have time to have sex? And he learned like, oh, like resistance can be fun, it can be creative. And that became a huge part of the movement that he built. Now, he was a bass player in a rock band at the time, and 10 of his college friends got together and they just wanted resistance to the dictator to be the coolest thing to do in town. And they ran that revolution like it was a marketing agency or something like that, coming up with like these compelling images and these funny skits and sketches and demonstrations. Like when they got the funding, they produced a commercial about the dictator, and this woman had this shirt she was looking at. She was like, I can't get this spot out of my shirt. And when you zoomed in, and it was a picture of Slobodan Milosevic's face, and she puts it in the washer and she presses the start button, and the start button was the clenched fist, the Otpor clenched fist. And they washed the face of the dictator out of the shirt with this, with the symbol of the clenched fist. Like we do have to get creative. We do have to be artistic, and everyone has a role to play. And I love what Tony Kadek Bambara says about the role of the artist in the revolution is to make it irresistible. I love what, I think that this quote has been attributed to Emma Goldman, but it was more of a paraphrase of what she said. She was like, a revolution without dancing is not worth having.
I'm giving you roses while we're young. Can't wait for tomorrow. Who knows if it'll come? stay young. Need for you to make a promise till heaven and earth do pass away. Be true to the you I've learned to love for so long.
I feel like I could ask you questions and listen to you all day, Andre and Cedric, both of you. I feel like a sponge. I'm just soaking in everything. But just to kind of wrap up, you know, we are a community that is mostly white, and we are really trying to push not just diversity, but inclusion and equity. And so, I mean, aside from the piece about being creative and creating something irresistible for people to jump into, you know, is there any other advice that you could give us?
White people need to organize amongst themselves to dismantle white supremacy. You know, like, honestly, so I'm a musician, and for a long time, like, I wanted to get better at the guitar. And people told me how to get better at the guitar. They said, what you need to do is sit down, you need to set a metronome, you know, the tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And you need to play your scales to the metronome at a slow speed. And once you can do that 100 times perfectly, you're going to speed it up and then do that. And someone told me that years ago. I mean, it had to be like 2013 or something like that. And I didn't take that advice. I just kept playing my guitar, and I was like, I want to get better, but I wasn't really getting that. I wasn't really getting better. And the thing was, I was trying to avoid the thing that I know that I need to do. If I want to play the guitar better, and I do play the guitar better because I sat down with the metronome, I set it to 50 beats per minute, and I played my scales until I could play it at 120 beats per minute. White people in America keep asking, what can we do? What should we do? You need to organize a mass movement of white people to dismantle white supremacy. That is the path. Now, how do you do that? Okay, buy Sergei Popovich's book, Blueprint for Revolution, and then buy Eric McBay's Full Spectrum Resistance. Those two books alone should be able to get you started, no matter where you are. And start organizing.
All right. Well, and I would go even a step further. Look at the ways that organizing has been done for the LGBTQ movement. Yeah. Start doing the same things that you've been doing there, but do it with white supremacy.
We are responsible for the world that we'll pass on to the next generation if we get the chance to do that, you know? So get in somewhere and think about, like, what can you do? Who can you bring together? What do you care about and what can be done? That's the only way that this is going to happen. And just finally, like, I keep saying that white people need to organize amongst themselves, but you need to be accountable to people of color. You need to be accountable to Black people. We can't have the whites just going off and deciding what they're going to do about racism by themselves.
I was just about to ask you, like, can these organization groups just be white? Because then you, like, tread that white savior complex line.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
So like, there are actually Black-led organizations that do caucusing. Like, I've seen that in Black Lives Matter, you know, chapters where, like, they are mixed spaces, but they spend time, you know, separate for a time caucusing, you know, and they come back together, you know, just thinking of models like that. So, but honestly, the thing that white people need to do is, if you're really serious about doing something about white supremacy, you need to organize. Organize something. Every instance of organizing is not the same. You know, organizing a monthly potluck where you talk about a book that you're reading, that's organizing. Organizing a boycott of some sort, that's also organizing. But I use both of those to say, if people are going out to protest and you say, hey, I'll take care, I'll provide free childcare so that the moms can go and the dads can go, and the parents can go, rather, because both of those terms are gendered. So that parents can go. That's organizing, you know. But I mean, I just realized this isn't just for social change. I mean, for me to figure out like how am I going to complete my work for the week, I have to create a plan, get some people together, and start thinking about how to dismantle white supremacy. And if you need help, get those books.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Aye.
Cedric, do you have anything else?
Man, we good. He just gave a new great commission.
Yeah. I think, Andre, we're going to close with one of your songs, but I would like for you, if you could just, is there one piece of hope that you could offer? Just 5 words or less, 10 words or less, not to put you in a box.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing that I always leave people with is, it doesn't have to be this way. And the reason that it doesn't have to be this way is because the status quo is sustained by our participation. And so if the status quo is maintained by our participation, then it can be changed through our participation in something else, through our dreaming and building something else. We have to cultivate that imagination. We have to cultivate that spirit and culture of resistance. And that as I say that, I stole that phrase from Eric McBay. If I remember, I was trying to give people credit. That culture of resistance. And we have to organize because that's where our power is. That's where the hope is. Like when people talk to me about hope, a lot of times they want something without conditions, right? They just want to feel good. But hope is tied to memory because memory is tied to imagination. You can't imagine anything that is not based on something that you've seen or heard before. And that's why it's so important to keep nourishing your imagination on these stories of people who have gone before and who have changed the world, because that memory gives you the grounds for hope. And it gives you imagination for what the future can look like so that you can imagine alternative possibilities and alternative futures. But hope that doesn't have action, like you have without memory, you don't have the grounds for hope. Yeah. But without action, you don't have a reason to hope, because the only thing that allows you to say within this uncertainty, I have the agency and the power to possibly change the outcomes of what could be, is if we act together. So yes, there is hope if we will act.
Amen.
Oh, that's good, Andre. So if we want to keep up with you, I know you have a weekly email, Hope and Hard Pills, that we can sign up for. And then what else, how else can we follow you?
Folks can follow me on Twitter at Andre Henry. I'm on Instagram as the Andre Henry. Honestly, the best way to keep in touch, though, is through my website. It's andrehenry.co, where my website is. Sorry, I just said that's my website, but it's my email. That's for the people that sign up for my email. And on the email, I always send out, like, if I've written something new, if we have a new podcast, if I've produced some new music, then, I always send that out.
I can dig it.
Thank you. I'm with Cedric.
Yes.
I can dig it too.